Hey there, welcome to Unit 1, Lesson 3. So you should only be watching this video if you are absent from class when we did this lesson, or if you're just wanting to do a little bit of review, then you could always go back and watch it as well. Before I get into the notes today, which are obviously going to be on immigration, because it is a Monday assignment, I do want to remind you to go to your weekly announcement for this week and read through that information there, because there's a lot of important information that I share each week, but I'm not going to go through that in the video. You've got plenty of time to be able to do that on your own. So today we're going to talk about immigration, and then there are two things that I want you to do, and then we'll be done. So let's go ahead and get into these notes. Now, last week we talked about migration, and how migration was the movement of people from one place within a country to another. So we specifically were focusing a lot on westward migration, so people moving out west. Today we're going to be talking about immigration, things that are pulling people from one country into another. And there are still going to be push and pull factors here. So those push factors are going to continue to be those things that encourage people to leave their place of residence. And this is going to be based on their firsthand experiences of what their life is like and how rough their life is. So they might be leaving because the cost of living is too high where they are, or they could be surrounded by war, or they could be living in poverty. They could be having really, really bad weather and climate issues. There's a lot of different things that cause people to want to leave where they are currently located. Those pull factors are going to be the things that attract people to that other country. So this is not going to be based on firsthand experience, but based on what you might have read about a particular area, or what your family that lives over in that area might be telling you, things like that. So this is going to be what makes you want to go to that area. So this could be economic opportunity, such as the ability to get jobs, land, religious freedom, political freedom, such as the right to vote, your freedom of speech, those things that people often think of when they think about the rights that Americans have. So these are all things that were big factors in determining why people were deciding, you know what, I'm going to leave Ireland and everything I know to go and try and get the American dream over in the United States. So let's talk about who was coming. So I did just mention Ireland. I want you to see that most of the people that are coming and immigrating into the United States, overwhelmingly, almost 11 million of them come from Europe. We have old world or old immigrants that were coming earlier. So this was going to be people from Northern and Western Europe. And then a little bit later, we see some new immigrants. And so these are going to be people coming from like Italy and Greece and things like that, and Southern and Eastern Europe. But a lot of them come and they get here through Ellis Island. We'll talk more about that in a minute. With that being said, you need to know that that's not the only place immigration was happening. So people were coming from China and Japan. We'll talk a little bit more about Chinese immigration here in a minute as well. We did have Canadian immigration coming into the United States, and people from Central and South America. So we're getting people coming from all over the world. It's just most of them are coming from Europe. And so if we take a look at this, in class, we would have taken the opportunity to really discuss this, but because you're watching in a video, we can't do too much discussion, obviously. So I just want you to notice and pay attention to the changes that happened. So I told you there was a bit of a flip-flop, right? So in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, it was mostly Northern and Western Europeans that were coming over, a lot of people from Ireland, stuff like that. And then we see the switch to where it kind of evens out to the fact that we see that more Southern and Eastern Europeans are actually coming over as well. So I just want you to have an idea that even though they're mostly from Europe, there's different waves of people coming from different regions of Europe and immigrating into the United States. So when they came into the United States, if they were coming from Europe, they most likely were going to come through Ellis Island, which you've probably learned about at some point in your schooling history before. You're going to be doing a little bit of a deeper dive into that today for your assignment. But this was the European Immigration Gateway. It's located in New York City. It's still there today. You can go and visit it. Well, when we're not in a pandemic, probably. But there's no way of knowing that the people that got on these boats from Europe, when they traveled across the sea, they just had to cross their fingers and hope that they were going to be able to get inside of the United States. There's a whole long, long process that they had to go through, and they wouldn't know until they showed up if they were going to be admitted or if they were going to be rejected and turned away. So you can imagine how nerve-wracking and scary that must have been. So in order to get into the country, they're going to have to pass a medical exam, a mental exam. They have to meet certain legal requirements, like they can't have any like past felonies. You have to be able to show that you can work. You have to show that you have some money saved so that you can start your life up for you. So it's a very in-depth process. You'll be learning more about that process in your assignment today. Asian immigrants, on the other hand, were coming in through the other side and coming into Angel Island. And Angel Island is right over by San Francisco in California. So if you think about it, as you saw the map a few minutes ago, it makes sense that European immigrants would come in and they go across the Atlantic Ocean and come in at New York City, and your Asian immigrants would come across the Pacific Ocean and come in on the West Coast, and they would do that over at Angel Island. There were harsher requirements for Asians to be able to get into the United States. Their questioning that they had to go through was harsher. They were often detained in very, very filthy, horrible conditions while they were waiting to see if they could get in or not. And this just comes down to the fact of, I mean, pure ignorance and racism. Like the Europeans looked like the everyday white people. Asians clearly did not. And so there was a bit more discrimination that was happening there. So here again, when we were in class, we talked about these photos, had a little bit more of a discussion on it, but I just want you to see here, most of these people that are immigrating into the United States are going to tend to be pretty poor, desperate to be able to create a new life for themselves. They basically only have what they could fit in their suitcase. It's not like they had like multiple trunks of stuff that they had all of their belongings in. Like this was it. So you can see here some people going through some medical checks as they're coming in. And then this is a picture here of Ellis Island. And then here you can see at Angel Island, which is right here, you can see the Asian immigrants coming through the medical check. This is a book that was actually copied. So you can see there's a seam in a book right here, but you can see there's a man right here, a white man right here, a US citizen that is putting all of these young Asian boys through this medical test, and another one that's going to be copying down the information. So it was really, really difficult for them to be able to get into the United States, much harsher than it was for people coming into Ellis Island. So you can see over here where San Francisco is that there's a big red dot. So these red dots mark population. So the bigger the red dot is, the more populated an area becomes. And so because of people coming and immigrating in San Francisco at Ellis Island or Angel Island, we're going to see a lot more population happening over here. But you can also see that most of the population explosion happens here in the northeast section of the country. So again, this would have been a question in class that we would have had a discussion about, but I just want you to see that this whole northeast area right here is really where you're going to see most of the people coming in. This is where the jobs are, the industry jobs. We'll talk more about industry later this week and how it's growing during this time. So this is where the factories are and things like that. And so a lot of people come and settle in these areas. So once the immigrants showed up in the United States, it's not like their life was suddenly like super easy. So there's obviously going to be language barriers, not as bad if you're like Irish, for example, because they also speak English. But if you are, Italian or Greek or Chinese, there's going to be some major language barriers. It's going to be difficult to find a job. There's so many other immigrants coming in and other Americans that are already there. As well that are looking for jobs. Living conditions are going to be pretty poor. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow when we do urbanization. To escape discrimination and violence, a lot of times people from the same ethnicities would kind of congregate and be together. So we see the development of ethnic neighborhoods like Chinatown or Little Italy. So in order to feel like they were comfortable and have a little bit of peace of home with them and be around people who did speak the same language, you would have a lot of Italians living in one area together, a lot of people from Greece living in an area together, a lot of Chinese people living in a neighborhood together. And that was going to be able to like help them, kind of feel a little bit more at home whenever they are in the United States. Typically speaking, though, because so many of these immigrants are poor and that they're living in rundown situations, a lot of them are the worst neighborhoods of the cities. But some areas were offered out there to be able to help immigrants get on their feet. It's unfair to say that everybody was being discriminatory against immigrants and they didn't want them in the country, the same way that we wouldn't want people to make that judgment about immigrants in the United States today. So there were lots of people who did want to help these immigrants become successful American citizens and get on their feet, because if they become successful, then the country becomes successful. One of those people was a woman by the name of Jane Addams, and Jane Addams created this house in Chicago called the Hull House, and it became a community center for immigrants, a place that would offer daycare so that those families could go to their jobs. It would offer English classes to help you learn the language. It would offer dances and different social events so that people could get to know each other more. So there were opportunities out there for people to be helped as they were being or as they were coming into the United States. So when we see a lot of these immigrants coming in, a lot of them tend to get the same kind of jobs from the same few categories. Many people, because the Industrial Revolution is happening, got factory jobs. A lot of people started working in construction. If you think about like those pictures of the men creating the skyscrapers, really high up in the sky, like that was a very dangerous job that not a lot of people wanted to do. So immigrants were really willing to do whatever they could to make money and be successful. Many of them, we mentioned last week, started working on railroads, especially the Irish and the Chinese, to finish up those transcontinental railroads. And then some people went into farming, especially a lot of people from Germany. That was something that they were very familiar with, and they went into that as their kind of career. So when you look at these jobs and you think about what they have in common, they're all really like hard, back-breaking, low skill level kind of jobs. These are the jobs a lot of times that other people wouldn't want to do. They weren't coming over and becoming doctors and lawyers and professors and stuff like that. They were taking the jobs that nobody else wanted, which has often been kind of a theme for immigration throughout all of US history. So some people wanted to help them out, like I said before, with the whole house and like getting everybody on their feet. But there were others that were not so kind and not so great. So native born Americans, make sure you're being familiar with the way I'm saying that. So I'm not talking about Native Americans like Indians, for example. I'm talking about native born Americans. So Americans, in this case, we're talking about white people that were born in America. A lot of times they disliked immigrants. A lot of times that was because of the fact that they were ignorant to other groups, or they felt like their jobs were being stolen by these other groups, or they now are going to get paid less because the immigrants are willing to get paid less than they are. So there's just a lot of like ignorant discrimination. And so there was an entire political party created around this, though, called the American Party, because they were trying to support everything American. But a lot of people just refer to it as the Know Nothing Party, because it was a kind of like a secret society party. Like if you were in it, you didn't talk about the fact that you were in it. Not surprisingly, if we even look at things today, like when people are, racist, they don't run around screaming like, I'm racist and I discriminate against people. So that's kind of the same thing. Like, so if somebody asked you about it, you were like, I don't know anything about that party. So it got the nickname of the Know Nothing Party. But they were dedicated to trying to get people elected to positions, especially at local and state levels, to try to stop the influence of immigrants. So well, I mean, we already talked about this. We discussed this in class too, but this oftentimes becomes a trend throughout US history because of the fact that people are just ignorant to the different cultures and they feel threatened in some way. And so that's why this discrimination tends to happen. So you can see here, like a flag from the American Party. So when this says Native Americans, be aware of foreign influence, it is not saying like Native Americans as in Indians, it's saying native born Americans. And then you can see some businesses would actually have signs like this where they're like, we need to hire people, but if you're Irish, don't even bother applying. Like, we don't want you to come. So the last thing that I want to talk about in the last slide is how the Chinese immigrants were mistreated. So there was definite discrimination against the European immigrants, but the Chinese really, really got the bulk of really bad discrimination. So In 1882, the United States, so at this point, keep in mind the transcontinental railroads have been built, and we kind of no longer need the Chinese to be helping to build the railroads on the other side of the country. So once that happens, everybody's like, oh, well, we don't need the Chinese anymore. And now we feel like there's just too many Chinese people coming. And so we want to stop that from happening. So we literally see the United States Congress pass a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And they did this in 1882. And so what this meant was that if you were Chinese, you could no longer immigrate into the United States. Like they excluded the Chinese from coming over. You can see here an advertisement saying basically like if you want to have a way to try and answer the Chinese question and express your interest on the Chinese and if they should be allowed here and stuff like that, then come to this meeting, right? And so they wanted to be able to like have an open forum to talk about those things because so many people were so racist and discriminatory against the Chinese. The threat was that they were taking jobs. In the late 1870s, there had been an economic depression in the United States, and that caused even more anti-Chinese sentiment to grow because the white people felt that basically they deserved the ability to have those jobs over the Chinese. You can see here, let me move myself out of the way, an extremely racist and horrible political cartoon of the time that it says the anti-Chinese movement spread across the United States in the 1870s and 1880s. So this is really, really stereotypical, but a lot of people that were from Asia and that were Chinese that had immigrated into the United States had a lot of like like they would have a job of like washing people's clothes and stuff like that. So what we see here is that this new invention, a steam washer, that basically you would put the clothes in and then you would crank the side and that would, it's kind of like, you know, your first like washing machine essentially, was patented in 1883. And this cartoon here, we can tell is supposed to be America because it's got a little glimpse of Uncle Sam in it, basically by looking at the stripes on the pants. So it's representing America and this new technology. And they're like, listen, we don't need you here in San Francisco anymore. We can wash our clothes by ourselves. Thank you. Go back to China. So there was some really, really awful things that were done to the Chinese people. Basically speaking, the act that was passed, the Chinese Exclusion Act, was going to ban most Chinese immigration in the United States for 10 years. So from 1882 to 1892 is when it was supposed to be banned. But then every 10 years, it would go in front of Congress again, and they would have to decide to renew it or not. And in 1892, they renewed it. In 1902, they renewed it. Decade and decade afterwards, they would continue to do this. It wasn't lifted until 1943. And the reason that it was lifted in 1943 was because we were then in the midst of World War II, and the Chinese were our ally in World War II. And so everybody was like, maybe we shouldn't have this law telling one of our allies that's on our side here in this war and helping us out that they're not even allowed to come to the United States. So it wasn't until that time that it was lifted. Now, does that mean that no Chinese people ever immigrated into the country between 1882 and 1943? Absolutely not. But a huge number dropped off as to the amount of people that were immigrating into the US. So that brings us to the end of notes. Just gives you a little bit of information about your stuff for Unit 1, Lesson 3. So let's talk about what you're going to do. You have 2 activities that I need you to do today. The first of those is an Ellis Island assignment. So I'm going to walk you through that here in just a second. The second one is that there's no assignment that goes along with this. I'm honestly just going to trust that you're going to watch the 10-minute video that I ask you to watch. So I just need you to go through and watch this crash course video that kind of goes over immigration and the growth of cities during this time. This information is going to come in really handy to help you with tomorrow's assignment. So it's going to kind of encapsulate today and tomorrow's topics into one video. Also, if you're watching this video because you were absent, make sure that after you get done completing your Ellis Island assignment and watching the video, that you go down here and you click on this lesson demonstrated form and turn that in so that we can get your assignment switched over from your attendance switched over from an absence to a present. But you've got to do that within the next school day. So if you're absent today, I need that demonstration form by the end of Tuesday for me to be able to switch it. So let me click here on Ellis Island so that you can see the assignment. You might be familiar with this website. I don't know if any other teachers have ever had you go look at it. I know that for an assignment for my American History 1 class, there is a time where we go in and we look at the same website. So it might be familiar. You may have had to do the same thing. You're going to click right here on this assignment or on this website. And when you get to this website, it's going to talk you through what each step was like for immigrants coming in. So you can see here that we've got the first stop, which is the passage, which I mean, technically isn't a stop. It's the passage of you leaving the one country and coming over, like the voyage that you make. You're going to read this information. And then when you're done with that stop, you go over to the next one. So you click on this next button, and then you've got the arrival, and you're going to read this. And then you go to the next one, which is the baggage room, and then you read this. So you're going to go through all 10 steps that you've got to do. And then on your own paper, or not paper, but on your own Google Doc, I want you to just tell me all of the 10 stops. So identify each of those 10 stops for me, and then explain what happens at that stop in your own words. So that's going to be 20 points of your grade. Or really, I should rephrase that. I guess that needs to be changed. I need to edit it. This is going to be like 80 points of your grade. This will be 20 points of your grade. So don't forget to do this second part here. After you get done identifying and explaining what happens at each stop in your own words, not copying and pasting, then you're going to tell me, considering those different stops, what do you think an immigrant would be thinking as they arrive at Ellis Island? And I need you to not just say like they'd be scared. Like I need you to explain in a few sentences here so that you can get full credit. So make sure that you are getting that done, and that otherwise you're gonna, the highest grade you'll be able to get would be a B on this assignment. So we want you to make sure you get all of it done. Open up a Google Doc, type it in there, or type it in a text box below. The text boxes are a little iffy sometimes because they're not going to save what you type. So I prefer typing things in a Google Doc and then submitting it, because then I know it's also saved somewhere. If you have any questions, let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. I know this video was a little bit longer, but this is by far the longest one for the week. The rest of the days are a lot of it just being like you on your own and not a lot of lecture coming from me or anything. So if you have anything that you need, let me know. And other than that, I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, y'all.